Welcome to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and as always, Damon Smith. We're here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. And this week, we are continuing our deep dive into stage 4 of shamanic technique, and we're going to be looking at another energy change. So we started our deep dive looking at persist. This episode, I nearly said lesson then, suppose it is a lesson, kind of. But this episode, we're going to be looking at yield. So Damon, first of all, how you doing, man?
I'm good, mate. Despite physical injuries, I am in mental high spirits. So, yeah, not so bad. How about you, mate?
Not bad, not bad. I'm surviving on four cups of coffee here and about 3 hours sleep. So we'll see how we get through this one. So, you know, I think the interesting thing about these deep dives into the changes is that these episodes are going to start weaving together like a bit of a jigsaw, aren't they? Because we have part 1 and part 2 of a deep dive into the change persist, but yet within that episode we talked about all sorts of other changes that sort of emanate from that change, right? So
yeah,
whilst we have a core change that we focus the episode on, we also have this thing where, you know, you have layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and all these changes sort of stack, don't they?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things to say is we'll just refer people back to the previous deep dive episodes that we did on persist. This is not a beginner's episode. We'll probably need to say that at the start of every one of them, because hopefully we do get new people coming and listening to the Woven Energy podcast, which is fantastic. But we should just probably mention that it's probably best if you're new, this is not a good place to start. So rewind back to preferably the start of the podcast and just start listening from there. We have a sort of linear podcast going on. There are some general interest episodes interspersed between the heavy duty stuff, but we're talking about level 4 of shamanic practice here. This is not a beginner's episode. That's just the first.
The proper stuff.
Yeah. For those that are more on top of what we're doing and have done a bit of practice, then just wind back a little way, just to remind yourself of what we said in the persist episode, because a lot of that is relevant. Yield is the kind of her yi, it's Futatsu Totsu, partner of persist. So, they are very closely interrelated with each other.
And I better just say, these changes that we're talking about, these are ways in which to enrich your stage 4 technique. Mainly the one that we've focused on, which is, stage 3 is the spirit dance, isn't it? So, in fact, maybe you could just fill us in on that. What are the...
Well, one thing to say is that there are ways in which you can enrich your level 3 and level 4 technique. They are energy changes that occur within nature. But I think a better way to look at them is these are commonly occurring patterns of energy change that occur in the universe, broadly speaking, in all places in the universe. There are many, many different energy changes, and some are more common than others, but all of these have a commonality. That is, you will see them looking in nature and even looking beyond our own planet to the solar system, the Milky Way, and beyond. You will see these energy changes happening in nature, independent of human beings. So one of the ways to look at what we're trying to do with spirit dance is we're trying to incorporate an understanding of the whole of nature, big ask, into the spirit dance or the drum technique, or whatever type of shamanic technique we're performing, into that technique for a couple of reasons. One is just to give us a better understanding of nature, which we're always trying to chip away at, if you like. Understanding our real teacher in shamanism. What is a shaman? A shaman is somebody who's decided not necessarily to ditch human beings as teachers, although there are some shamans like that, but to say nature itself directly is probably a more better and reliable teacher than a human being is. And so what we're really trying to do here is incorporate energy changes that occur within nature into the energy changes that we are, to a certain extent, generating and to a certain extent participating in depending on the level of our spirit dance, so that we start to match the energy changes that go on within nature. I mean, we never do for a long, long time. I've been working on this forever. And no matter how good your shamanic techniques gets, it always still feels like matching what goes on in nature is such a tall ask. But the more the closer you get to that ideal, the richer your interactions, your energy interactions with the natural world will be, and the more that you'll learn from them. So at this stage in level 4, we're trying to talk about what can we incorporate into our shamanic technique that allow us to better understand the energy changes that nature shows us at level 5, 6, 7 technique. The energy changes that nature reveals to us. If we're already somewhat on top of some of those, we can learn a lot more. And what I mean on top of, I don't mean understanding in our minds. I mean understanding in mind, body, and spirit, all acting together, unified as one entity in a state of chillicity. Then we can understand better what nature is trying to teach us, because to a certain extent, understanding these changes is understanding the energy language of nature. The language, the energy language that nature kind of speaks in, which is huge and diverse. And so that's why there's quite a lot of these things we need to talk about. The one we want to talk about today is yielding energy change. And in terms of esotericism, in terms of that sort of microcosm and macrocosm, that would be all of the yins in both cases. So within the microcosm, we have yin, yin, yin for the three realms, and in the macrocosm we have yin, yin, yin for the three realms. So it's the exact opposite of the persist stack, if you want to call it a stack. And clearly, whenever you have this kind of exact opposite relationship between in the microcosm by itself and the macrocosm by itself, or the two things taken together as one, the
microcosm
opposite
is the change that's happening within us, and the macrocosm is the change that's happening outside of us within nature. Is that?
That's simplistically correct, Joe. Yeah, that's simplistically correct. Yes,
I'll take that one.
A little bit oversimplistic, but yeah. So the really, when you're talking about the changes apply on many different levels. So the microcosm's really the change that's occurring within the system of focus, the energy system of focus, or the core energy system in which you're participating. Whereas, I shouldn't say the change, because there could be more than one simultaneously, whereas the macrocosm is a change that is occurring within the context in which that system exists. And obviously there's bleed over between the two. Because nothing stands alone in this universe, one of the intuitions of shamanism is that all things are interrelated through an enormous pattern of energy, a weave, hence the name of the Woven Energy podcast, that extends throughout nature and unites all things into one. That is the energy weave that we are trying, A, to understand as shamans. The best way to understand that is for nature to teach us about it, but also B, to incorporate into our somewhat higher level, let's call it intermediate level shamanic technique, so that we can speak the language of nature, the energy language of nature, when we start to apply that technique to derive understanding. I don't think I've ever explained it like that before, but that's something that kind of occurred to me just now. So
and that's why I like to ask you these questions, Dylan.
Yeah. So, yield. What's this change about? Well, it's the most accepting change there is. It's a change that is so fundamental that it can't really be separated, because in the way that persist can't. For instance, in spirit dance, persist is absolutely necessary to prevent your spirit dance from being a highly fragmentary series of spirit dances, plural, each of which lasts a couple of seconds. That's how persist is essential to spirit dance, to keep the radar on. the nature radar that you're forming through your spirit dance to keep it on. You can contrast that with it going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off at different points in time. And, that would be like switching I guess in air traffic control terms, that's akin to switching your radar off periodically. Probably not the greatest idea, Maybe it is in some military applications, but I think in a busy airport, that would be a really bad idea. And it's a similar kind of thing. The reason that we use this kind of build this energy radar with drum technique and with dance technique is the same. It's the same as air traffic control uses their radar for in an airport. It's a really bad idea to assume things about nature, about the environment. If air traffic controllers worked off what they believe the position of the aircraft should be, or what the flight plan says they are, and didn't take some real data into account, looking at where they actually are using the radar and what's actually going on, there would be an awful lot more air traffic accidents than there are in real life. In any kind of high pressure, in terms of the risk involved, in any kind of high pressure environment like air traffic control, the risk of getting it wrong is very, very high. Or I don't mean the risk of it happening, but I mean the implications of if it does happen, if something does go wrong, the consequences can be devastating. In any environment like that, you often see a more, what I would call, shamanic attitude. Never mind where the plane is supposed to be. Where is it? Where is it actually? Yeah. I mean, you can take the information of where the plane's supposed to be into account. And this is what we're doing. And one of the things you must do in all of your shamanic technique is, first of all, in certain, let's narrow it down. Otherwise, we'll be here all week, to spirit dance technique. One of the things that you must do is persist your energy pattern. You must persist the weave that you're creating and participating in. But also, you must yield to the information that the technique is providing you with. If you don't accept that information, if you don't join with that information, and if you don't go further than that, if you don't nourish and nurture nature in nature's activity of giving that information to you, if you don't receive, if you like, then you will not learn very much. So
I know it's not what we're talking about, but it's a good life lesson, that as well. A very good life lesson. Just to be understanding.
Yeah. I mean, it's not exactly go with the flow, because there's a lot of go with the flow in it, has to be said. And I think a lot of people see this in martial arts like Tai Chi, where you think, you just yield to an attack. Well, that's one of the things you do. But the issue is that you are also nurturing nature. All things within the natural world and within natural systems, they nurture each other. There is a kind of positive reinforcement going on within the weave of nature, in that one change is nourishing another. And in order to nourish a change, you have to kind of accept the change in order for it to become something else. So in the Changes of Armabella, one of the phrases that I used that I'd forgotten about is nurture to become, rather than simply nurture, or rather than simply accept. Nurture to become.
So nurture is like an inference word, and accept as the inference. Yeah. I was going to ask you about those. Yeah.
So the inference words from the Armabella days were adhere, and very much that's like when you're getting into level 4, level 5 technique. We talked about already, you will encounter, as long as you persist, you will encounter energy changes that are occurring within nature, and you need to accept, to yield to those changes, but also to adhere to them so that you can nurture those changes, that you can be part of that energy wave going on within nature yourself. You need to catalyze those changes and the changes that you're introducing them, So catalyze is another inference word. Follow any energy that comes into the system. You need to follow that. But also it's like, in some ways, like giving birth or giving form to something. There's a potential within, you see this all the time in shamanic technique, all the time. There's a potential for something within the microcosm or the macrocosm. There's a potential for something within nature. And in a way, you accept that and give birth to it. I think we talked about that on the Q&A episode when we're talking about not really having a schedule for shamanic technique, but rather allowing or maybe a schedule for when you're going to practice it, but not exactly what you're doing. Allowing the environment and the situation and the time and the place to, in conjunction with you, give birth to or give form to some kind of shamanic technique that you're going to practice there and then. That kind of idea of giving birth, giving form through yielding is another really important part of this particular change. Joining together, obviously, we've talked about that a lot of times in terms of, spirit dance does not consist of a single energy thread. Tends to be a kind of single overarching thread within a single shaman's dance, but it splits and joins and has sub-patterns and sub-threads. Joining those things together, bringing those threads together into an overarching coherent, or let's not say coherent, let's say mutually supportive weave or web. That joining action is one of the aspects that yield provides to persist. In a way, yield allows persist through allowing that joining. Because otherwise, persist would just, if you just persisted an energy thread, you'd persist and persist and persist. But nothing very interesting would happen. Those threads need to be supported. They need to be joined and split and have various changes applied to them.
So persist, but yield to what comes to you.
Yeah,
through your dance.
Those changes need to all come back together. We talked about the Toiron Buchik, the circle dance in Mongolia. Some of the shamans go into the center of the circle of people who are dancing around the outside, and they do their own weave within that. But they always return to the main weave of the group. They join, and this is yield. This is the energy change. They take their, not independently, but spun off energy pattern, and they join it back together. So again, this is another word that we used for an inference word for yield. And then we came up with this word nyotny. Now, Joel will remember the term nyotny a lot because we were using that. This is the term nyotny is the preservation of, in biology, is the preservation of juvenile characteristics in adults. Human beings are naturally very nyotinous for instance, we don't grow hair all over our bodies. That's an example of nyotny in physical terms in human beings. Not to the extent that other mammals do anyway. But also in terms of our attitudes, it's the preservation of a playfulness in older life that again is yielding to changes with the environment. You don't have to be, some animals don't have to be that playful. I mean, they do in some ways, but they could be playful most wild animals have to be playful in some ways. I mean, even in later life, but not to the extent that primates have had to be. They can do it within a very narrow band. You think about crocodiles. Crocodiles are perfectly adapted, absolutely perfectly adapted for what they do, which is ambush predation at the edge of the water. They're
killing robots.
The pinnacle, almost the pinnacle of possible adaptation for that. And that's why they haven't evolved very much in millions and millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. Whereas primates, we've only been around for 10 minutes in geological timescale, in terms of geological timescales, and we got all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff going on in a very short period of time. Human beings, we have not been here very long compared to crocodiles. It's a mere blink of an eye compared to crocodiles, for instance. But look at what we've done. And the thing that's enabled us to have all that variety, our tools and our technology and our strategies and our shamanic technique and our science, which is sort of a slightly mutated version of shamanic technique. Check out the alchemy podcast, or the alchemy tutorial on the Heretics podcast. Sorry, there is a pending episode that's been recorded for a while that I need to get out. Apologies to Graham if you're listening, mate. I'll get it out very soon. All of that is to do with this acceptance that there is change within nature, and the neoteny comes through not just accepting the change. Okay, now there's an earthquake. Oh, okay, now nature's blowing the wind. It's more than that. It's rejoicing in it. It's accepting in a loving way. It's almost like it's amazing that there's an earthquake or whatever it is that's and being enthused about it, and what can spring out of that. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes, even if there are big problems. Miki said this all the time, she called bud sprout from knots. That was the way she put it. You can have thorny difficulties in your life, but they're always the opportunity for something good to come out of them.
I always associated that neoteny with spontaneousness and kind of like being playful. And being in the moment.
It is. Toshaltine for sure. But this particular aspect, there was a lot of aspects to neoteny, really. But this particular aspect, yield, without that, there is none. There is no neoteny. Neoteny is not possible. It's an accepting attitude towards nature, but it's an accepting and somewhat... It's not passively accepting, it's enthusiastically accepting the changes that go within nature. And you can see immediately why that's important within spirit dance. Because if you don't, you're going to be creating an energy radar, but you're not accepting anything the radar is telling you. Bit of a wasted effort, probably. And then I already talked about nourish and nurture to become. And the other one is to receive. Sometimes... Can
I just ask as well? Also, you need to be playful in order to facilitate the changes which you are going to accept, right?
Exactly.
There needs to be that element of freedom and free play.
There's playfulness in terms of doing things with those changes. That's other changes than the one we're talking about. But that desire to take in those changes and to initiate something with them, that is the yield. That is the yin-yin in terms of microcosm and macrocosm. So the overarching thing is like you're receiving. And again, ultimately coming back to the ultimate purpose of shamanic technique, you're trying to receive knowledge. Miki called it jikimotsu, the heavenly dew, the knowledge that comes not from human beings, but directly from nature. And obviously that's where the receiving comes from, the receiving part of shamanic technique. So that's yield. And in terms of, the energy changes that we've already talked about, this is meld and meld. So it's meld in our meld terminology, it's meld in the microcosm, it's meld in the macrocosm. It's nagdach in Mongolian within both. That kind of two becoming one, two lines becoming one. And in a way, that whole two-in-one idea, the futatsu totsu, the ahara-yi, that idea that has persisted within shamanism and esotericism for so long. For instance, on Heretics, we were talking about Osiris and Isis being a sort of hermaphroditic deity. They're not really separate from each other when you really understand what's going on in alchemy. This is the same kind of thing, and yield supports that idea as well. So yield supports each and every energy change as far as that goes. So these things, this is why we start with them, and I guess this is why the Book of Changes also starts with them, despite the best efforts of Confucians to muddy the waters. It rightly starts with these two, because really within shamanic technique, there is definitely never a time when the yield change isn't happening. And there's barely ever a time when the persist change isn't happening. And the only time persist wouldn't be happening would be shard.
One of the issues, one of the things, the great moments that when I felt like I got a bit more of an understanding is when we learn these, we're tempted to think of them all as just separate changes, as like, oh, this is this, that is that. But really, there's a bit of everything in everything, isn't there? It's just what's the most prevalent, what's the most that sticks out. Exactly.
You can't separate them. And you're right, because we've had that discussion a load of times, and I've had it with other people as well, actually quite recently. Can you make a martial art that, I've had this question and thought about it myself, can you make a martial art where for each of the 8 base changes, can you do one technique for each change? And the answer is no, you can't. No, you can't. I mean, Tai Chi got closest to that, So for instance, Pang, the famous Pang energy in Tai Chi, that's all the yangs, yeah. But when you do Pang as a technique, you do Pang as a method in Tai Chi, there's virtually all the changes in there, virtually all of them. Some more than others, but they're all there,
Yeah, so, you can do 2-person drills that emphasize certain core changes.
Exactly.
That's all it is. It's emphasizing.
And this is true of spirit
change,
dance. This is absolutely true of spirit dance as well as of Tai Chi. You can do practices within your spirit dance, mostly at level 3, but also at level 4, which focus in on particular changes. But when you do those things, typically you're trying something new out and you're heading into the trough, and it's not really proper spirit dance that you're doing. You're not fully in a state of Chilisti. It's more about building that learning picture back into your dance so that you can come up out of the trough again and then do the whole thing in a state of Chilisti without thinking about it. And you just go through that pattern time and time again. So for instance, with yield, if you wanted to focus in on yield, then that is simply the best way to do that is something that you should do all the time with your spirit dance. Is just try to pick up on everything that's going on within your environment, within your grove. I mean, don't try too hard because that'll drag you down on the baseline, but set out with that kind of direction or that intention. So you're persisting, you're creating a weave, could be even a simplistic weave. Maybe you're moving forwards in the tail position, going circling the grove, as simple as that. But be perceptive to the plants and the brambles under your feet and the way the wind is blowing and the way the trees and the bushes and the plants and the birds and the insects and all that kind of stuff. Be perceptive to all of that. Let it come in wholesale. Don't judge any of it. But whenever any of it gives you a little nudge, so for instance, maybe the wind blows on your back in a certain direction, let it push you in that direction. Yeah, or you're practicing down at the beach and you're in the waves and the wave comes and it wants to move you a certain way. Go with it, but make something out of it. Yeah, but the going with it, the attitude to go with it, that's the yield. What you make out of it, that's all the changes. Yeah, but it's also persist because you probably want to make something out of that was already there within your weave that you're creating already. So it's the go out, if you want to focus on yield as a technique, go out, go to your grove or find a grove, start doing some simple spirit dance and let nature give you the information. You need Chilisti to do that, but by this time, we're talking about level 4, you should be able to do Chilisti pretty easy these days. Let it give the information, but don't just allow it to come in. Let it nudge you. Let it nudge you in certain directions,
well,
both physical and spiritual.
Yeah, I suppose yield is absolutely fundamental, right? Because without yield, there would be no dance. There would be no guidance from nature whatsoever, because you'd just be rejecting everything if you took it to the absolute extreme. So
absolutely. Well, I don't have a lot of praise for Confucians in life, but one thing they did get right is the first 2 hexagrams in the Book of Changes, persist and yield. Definitely the ones to start with, that's for sure. So that's and obviously the 2-in-1. Amabelja terminology, incidentally, for Tatsu or Aheryi, we came up with this, calling it the 21. That was Amabella lingo for the 2-in-1. It is obviously persist. We've talked about it already. It should be fairly obvious now that that's what the 2-in-1 is. And the inference words for persist were create, endure, firm, paragality, persevere, prop, stable, support, untiring. that persisting that we talked about
I
in the
hope you've
previous
got your
ones.
book in front of you, Damon, because that's very impressive if you haven't got your book in front of you.
I do have the book because you raved about it.
Yes.
I don't actually. So I don't actually have a physical copy of this book, The Changes of Armor, but other people do, and they're raving about the cover. So I thought I've got a PDF. It was a pre-production PDF, so I'm not sure it's exactly the same as what went to press, but I managed to fish one out. So that's what I'm reading off in terms of the 21. So, and as I said, the other reason I was looking it up or trying to find it was we said we'd republish it under the Woven Energy banner. We'll definitely rejig it as well because for instance, there's no Mongolian terms in there at all. Maybe we'll put some Mongolian terms in, given that it's the Woven Energy podcast.
That would be fantastic. It would be like a glossary of terms as well.
Yeah. And, could go to the extent of taking the Chinese out, maybe. I don't know. We did have some, we had our own variation on Theban script, as I recall, in the original. I don't know whether that went to press or not, but we could do something more along those kind of lines. That would help it. Well, in a way, that's sort of the heritage.
You're not going down the road of just making things hard for people again, are you, David?
No. Well,
for one of us.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit because this is also to do with yield, making things hard for people. Our society and our culture makes it hard for us because we are. If you think of how we grow up, we're born. We're usually pretty capable, shamanically speaking, when we're born. But that doesn't last long. We have parents and they give us these sort of toys and things and education and books, and we get sent to school, go through various schools. And in a way, we learn a lot of stuff that's really useful to us so that we can live our lives in the society that we live in. But two things. One is we're neglecting some stuff that would be really useful to us that we're not focusing on because, I don't know if you ever came across this in your academic career, but certainly, I've worked in a fairly substantial number of academic institutions, including the big ones, right? In this country, Oxford and Cambridge, right? There is a notion built into this stuff that never really gets spoken about. It's about things that are non-subjects, yeah? This particular subject is a proper subject to be talking about, yeah? But this other subject over here is a non-subject. Let's not talk about that because it might get our funding killed or whatever the reason is. Let's not go there. I was watching a video that they were talking to a mathematician who'd spent his life looking at a thing called the Collatz conjecture. If you haven't come across that, it's worth looking up. It's quite funny. But apparently his mentor had said to him that if you really want to destroy your career in mathematics, then start looking into the Collatz conjecture. That was it. Whole careers have been wasted on this unsolved problem that no mathematician's able to solve. There's plenty of problems that mathematicians can't solve, but this one's a dead simple problem that they can't solve. So it's quite an interesting one for that reason. So maybe we'll talk about it on Heretics at some point in time. But the point is that all of that stuff, we are educated away from nature, away from the natural world. Our ability to yield to energy changes within the environment is actually dulled. If swallows or bees or bats were driving cars, there would be virtually no road traffic accidents, none whatsoever. But unfortunately, we're not sensible enough to put cars in the hands of such able creatures. That's because of their sensitivity to what's going on around them. You think about what a swallow has to do. It has to take a tiny little insect out of the air that we couldn't even spot, we couldn't even see it, while flying in tight turns at enormously high speeds. It's an incredible thing that swallows can do. And if you had that kind of awareness of what's going on around you, there is no way you're going to drive into the back of the person in front when they stop too quickly. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. So So we are trained to make road traffic accidents by our education. Now, there's a controversial opinion, right? I believe that our education system causes road traffic accidents. I wonder if that's ever been mentioned in the House of Commons.
I don't know, but it'd be fascinating. You know, it is interesting, the whole education. It's going to be interesting over the next few decades, maybe, to see how the education system adapts. Because at the end of the day, the amount of jobs are just going to go down. And being able to have that element of creative play and spontaneousness, which is kind of drilled out of you in school, we need to bring that back. And I've thought for a long time, you know, schools just don't teach you how to be. They teach you how to.
They wean you off it. They start you with play, but then they wean you off it gradually.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what happens. Yeah, that's what happens. And it's not good. It's really not good. Because, as I've said, you know, in the workplace, I mean, some of the best teams that I've worked with in my career have been actually all the best teams that I've worked with in my career. And I've worked with, because of the nature of my work, I've worked with an awful lot of teams, over 100 at least, in a substantial way. All of the best teams were very playful in their attitude, all of them, without exception.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other teams weren't, and they tended to be the low-performing teams. The less playful, the lower their performance, despite the fact that they were adhering to quote-unquote best practice and setting up quote-unquote centers of excellence and stuff like that. Actually, they were very good, you know. Of course, that could change. Where teams are willing and able to change, they can change that. They can become one of those high-performing teams that you see doing amazing stuff. So that's pretty much yield itself. But then we have this bit where we have to talk about what changes fall out of yield. Well, in one sense, just before we start pulling a few out, in one sense, all changes fall out of yield that go on, certainly within Spirit Dance, because certainly at the advanced level, all of the changes that are going on with Spirit Dance are not really coming from you once you get good at your Spirit Dance. The changes are coming from your context, from nature. You are just riding that wave, participating, whatever you want to call it, enthusiastically going along with what nature wants of you. That is your Spirit Dance. That's the Spirit Dance that you're aspiring to. Yeah. While forever chipping away at breadth and depth by going down into the trough, getting yourself back on the baseline, chopping things up with your mind, messing up your Spirit Dance to introduce new changes, and then gradually practicing your level 3 to get them, and level 4 to get them back out of that trough again. So having said that, which changes are likely to come out of yield? Well, a big one in nature and in Spirit Dance is this idea of renewal. And it's probably one of the most well-known facts about shamanism, that shamanism focuses on the renewal that goes on within nature, the return to the beginning. As a shaman, the return to innocence, you know, that's one of the ways you can look at becoming a shaman. To a certain extent, you are returning to what you could do. A lot of what you could do when you were born, when you were a very young child, before we took this miasma onto us. And in a way, becoming a shaman is like a rebirth, but it's not a nirvana type, I'll sit under a tree and suddenly realize on the baseline what the answer to life, the universe, and everything is. It's a very gradual thing. It's a very gradual returning, just like the changing of the seasons. And it's a renewal. It's a reestablishment. And that's what we've been doing with Woven Energy and other people who are working in the area of shamanism. Soon we're doing a review on the Heretics podcast of a very interesting book by a couple of shamans who came from Christian backgrounds called Is Jesus the Ultimate Shaman? Or Jesus the Ultimate Shaman, it's called. And so we're going to be doing a review on that. If the authors listen to the podcast, which they may well do given their interest, don't worry, guys. We're not going to slate it. I can let that out from the beginning. It'll be a moderately positive review of that book. It's certainly a very interesting and thought-provoking book. That'll be coming up on Heretics before too long. And of course, you can see there's another controversial thing that they've had trying to explain to people that Jesus had shamanic aspects to his character, big time, not in a small way. Certainly in terms of the stuff. But anyway, we'll save that for heretics. That's just saying it's coming, along with the long overdue heretic episode that I'm still editing. So we picked out the term restore for the return, for the seasons to turn back to spring again, if you like, from spring all the way through the other seasons and back to spring again. In your grove, say you're circling the grove with your spirit dance or with your energy thread, you yield to that thread when you come around again. This is how you make a beautiful weave without any kind of ragged edges, because you are, in a way, restoring what you participated in the first time you went around the grove, or the second time, or the 15th time, or whatever. And in some ways, it's a reestablishment of what went before, but in other ways, it's a new beginning. It's restoring something, but not exactly in the form that it was there before. So restore is one of the important changes that can happen again, to reestablish something. And again, that's a bit like that thing we're talking about, the phoenix rising from the ashes, the reestablishment, the resurgence, the return of something coming back in. Very often, when the thing that you yield to is a problem, you can restore something. You can restore something that's as good as what came before the problem, but maybe you can restore something that's even better. Yeah, this kind of reestablishment, this renewal. So that's the first common change that will fall out of yield.
So we have renewal.
A renewal, restore is the word we picked.
Restore, sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
But it is renewal in a way. Again, so the words are again, anew, go back, new beginning, rebirth, reestablish, renew, resurge, return to, rise again. And if you remember what I said on the persist episodes, where you sort of have to pace, you don't have to, but you can pace the line, you can pace with, which is one of the changes, the existing thread that you've already created within the environment with your earlier part of your spirit dance. You can see how this restore is also part of joining with that. Now, another quite common change is what we call muster, M-U-S-T-E-R. That's to call things together, to marshal them, to mobilize them, to assemble them. We use this, muster sounds like slightly military, doesn't it? It's when you pull a bunch of disparate people together into an army. And we talked about in the overarching, or the overarching energy thread of your dance is mustered through countless smaller energy threads that all go together to assemble that are mustered through this change, to assemble that overarching energy thread. And it is a skill. This is a skill, this change in spirit dance. And sometimes as the dance gets richer, it's a difficult skill. You got a lot of energy threads going on once your dance starts to become complex. Once the weave starts to become complex that you're creating and you become more perceptive to the environment, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. And somehow you need to pull all of that stuff together.
You need to marshal your energy troops.
But remember, we're doing this in the state of chillicity, because what I don't want you to think is this term marshal implies that you think through how those things are going to work together and then you put them together. This is done spontaneously in a state of chillicity. There ain't no thinking going on. It's more the skill of being able to participate within those threads and to see we talk about that whole idea of nurturing to become, to see the nurturing to become, to see the potential there within nature. The nature wants, in a certain extent, nature, not with a mind, though nature's not sat there thinking, I want this to happen. Nature's information giving you this kind of an overarching change implied in that. And your ability as a shaman to draw those changes together, to piece them together and to put them into the shape or form that nature wants from that, or that nature is implying could become something bigger, like the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. That is your ability to apply muster. But it doesn't mean you sit down with a project plan and start planning it all out. It's a spontaneous ability for sure in spirit dance. It's not anything that's
it goes
baseline.
back to that thing I was saying about just not seeing all these changes as one thing, because muster almost just, it's not thinking about or I'm going to now muster. It's like they're just going to do that. Maybe I just had a thought, and see what you think to this. But like when you see one of those infinity mirrors where you look into the mirror and then, there's the large first reflection point, and then they gradually get smaller as you go further and further backwards.
Yes.
Now, it's like you don't. It's just because it's a mirror. They're just there. So if you stand in front of that mirror and you set yourself in motion, like all of the changes just sort of smaller and smaller and smaller and further away from that initial change, but they're all there, spreading into infinity, right? And that first energy change can be anything, and exactly. You have all of these other ones that form that infinity.
It's a good example because that's one of the things. We talked about the mirrors. Was it on the Q&A episode?
It was about a way of practicing Chelicity. Yeah, it's
and when we talk about using multiple mirrors, then people probably think of school science lessons and lasers and all that kind of stuff and prisms and all that kind of thing. But in a way, that distracts us from what a spiritual experience playing around with mirrors can be. It is a remarkably spiritual experience. It's something that a lot can be learned from. Like I said, in Mongolia, the particular type of shamans they call black shamans have used mirrors for hundreds of years, and they are incredibly good tools for shamanic practice. I mean, we've focused on the spirit dance for our podcast, but we could have focused on drum technique. We've done a bit about drum technique. We could have focused on Hammerlick, but we could also focus on
please do a podcast
mirrors.
on black shamans. That sounds so fascinating.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is we could have done an equal number of podcast episodes on mirror technique. I mean, I'm not good enough at mirror technique to do that. But I could go in and practice it. But I can see that it would be an incredible, if you really got into it, it'd be an incredibly rich and interesting discipline, shamanic set of techniques to use mirror technique as your kind of main thing in life. That would be something. So the next change that's very likely to fall out, a yield is entirely desirable. And it is quite, in terms of injury, it's or avoiding injury, it's quite important skill to learn. That's respect. We call it respect. Comply, equalize, hold back, simplify, yield. I mean, it's strange that saying one of the changes that comes out of yield is yield. But in a way, this is more in the sense that nature can be powerful. Nature can be very forceful. And nature can throw extremely powerful energies at you that you would be idiotic not to comply with. I just wanted to get a simplistic, rather strange example, since we're all supposed to be practicing Chelicity here. And, if you're in a decent state of Chelicity, this isn't going to happen. But one is, you just run face first into a tree, a strong tree, But much more likely is you trip and you fall. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people do when they trip and fall is they stick their hands out and they scrape their wrists off and they, maybe break their wrists if they're falling on a stone or something like that. People, for whatever reason in civilized society, we're really not good. I don't know naturally. I suspect babies are quite good at falling naturally, but everybody mollycoddles them, so we never actually find out, do we? I believe that babies can swim very, very quickly. If you drop them in the water, their ability to swim is, and the later you take up swimming in your life, the worse you are, the slower it is for you to learn it. That's another example of respect, but you must respect what's going on and comply with it. That nature has wanted you to fall. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. So one of the things to respect is to simplify, is to yield to the situation, to simplify and to equalize the energies going on there. So a great thing that we do in the martial arts, and maybe not enough shamans do, though I have seen shamans practicing it, is rolling. Most martial arts have some sort of rolling technique for falling. Because obviously in the martial arts, it's not an accidental fall. Somebody's chucking you into the ground, right? Generally.
Yeah.
So you really need it. But really, when you trip and you fall, complying with the situation and taking the energy, which may be the ground, rushing up towards your face, taking that, yielding to it, simplifying the situation. Even the ground could be textured and all kinds of stuff. But if you turn it into a roll, which is other energy changes that we haven't talked about yet, if you turn that into a roll and you roll around the forces that nature is shooting into your body, you can, through the application of this respect change out of yield, obviously you have to yield to those forces, you have to accept them, because sometimes when something bad happens, one of the natural human reactions, or a human reaction, let's say, not say natural noise, oh no, I wish this wasn't happening. I wish the ground wasn't rushing up at me. Well, it is. So as to comply with this fact, and it's that skill, again, in spirit dance, of say you're tripped by a bramble or whatever, just, okay, the nature's throwing the ground at me, or nature's throwing me at the ground, is just to respect that. But you know that because of your yielding, you yield to this information, you comply with it, you equalize the forces that are going on there. Maybe you just roll over and get back up and continue your dance. Maybe you do it very elegantly. Once you get good at rolling, you can do this.
It's really interesting you say that, because one of the things when I'm not still with my grandma and stuff, but like sometimes you get kind of a head rush and you know that you're going to faint, you know you're going to collapse, and people often get serious injuries or even die from those because they whack their head on the floor, right? So one of the things that I try and tell my grandma, if that ever happens, happened to her once or twice, is to, as soon as you feel that coming along, don't resist it, immediately get down on your knees and just lie on the floor. And just accept it's going to happen, and just get yourself on that floor as quickly as you can. Rather than stay standing and fight it and then collapse. So, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of, avoiding injury, as I got injured my shoulder recently, it's also, respect stops you injuring stuff. The thing to me, another danger is reckless enthusiasm, which I think every time I've injured myself through shamanic technique or martial arts technique or whatever, it has been, first of all, it's me injured myself, not somebody else. So there's nobody but myself to blame. And the culprit has been reckless enthusiasm. And it was indeed in this case as well, So, and then you learn from the injury, So for instance, that simplified spirit dance that I created while my shoulder's bust, that's great. Yeah, my butterfly dance. It's great. I'd already created it, I'd already had it up and running. I must have known the injury was coming, right?
Yeah.
So maybe not, And this is, again, there's an example of that whole thing with this idea that shamans can predict the future. Well, shamans understand nature. It doesn't mean that they're, doing some hocus pocus and they've got a time machine and they know what's coming in the future. But for whatever reason, I created this spirit dance that one day I might use when I was old or injured or frail or something. And hey, here I am, old and injured and frail. Who knows, what goes into that. But maybe I knew it was coming. But it's great. And I've been doing a lot of that. I was doing some of that with Ben. Hi, Ben. Shout out, mate. One of my students at the weekend, this kind of minimal butterfly spirit dance with the bust shoulder. It was great, actually. Really enjoyed it.
Well, there you go. You've got a bust shoulder. It's about being playful and being experimented in. I've got a broken shoulder. Right then, what can we do? Yeah. Let's have some fun.
There's a shamanic attitude. I've got a bust shoulder. Woohoo!
It's a tough one, that one, but yeah.
So that's respect. And in bigger terms, you have to respect nature, and human beings tend to be not very good at that. Just really, really bad at respecting nature. And we're probably going to, if we continue the way we're going and watch the nonsense that these politicians talk about at that COP climate summit thing, that's just the hot air. The hot air could elevate multiple balloons, despair, Don't vote for those guys. Guys, in general, just don't vote for them. I'm sure you don't if you're a Wolf and Edge podcast listener anyway, but don't vote for them, any of them.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if there was someone you could vote for, though. Sorry, but I don't know of anybody. So the next one, prepare. This is, again, to do with yield. Devote, enthuse, express, make ready, offer, provide for, ready. This is what we're doing all the time. We yield to what we know. What we know is that nature is a rich place. And we learn a lot from nature through our dance. And we're constantly preparing for the next time that nature throws itself in our face, headbutts us, if you like. We're devoting ourselves to that. We're enthused about it. This is prepare. And the change is, it's entirely yieldy within the microcosm. It's really the macrocosm where it has a cyclical aspect to it. It's actually Gaia in the macrocosm. It has this cyclical aspect to it where we've learned a bunch in one, call it simplistically, let's call it a spirit dance session. And that informs us. We get enthused about what we learned from that. And it informs us in how we make ready for the next one. And the next one, and the next one. We provide for the next one. That's prepare. And obviously, if we don't yield to the information that spirit dance, the energy radar within that spirit dance has provided to us, there won't be a great deal to inform or influence our preparation. So the next one is, we call it group, associate, connect, hold together, join together, put together, unite, work together. This is like in the bigger scale where we talked about the Toirun Butchig. It's not like that muster change. This is more like multiple aspects independently, multiple energy patterns independently, and quite naturally associated and connecting together, to holding together and joining together, quite naturally in fellowship, in harmony with each other. It's not a very active thing. It's very yield in the microcosm, but in the macrocosm, it has this aspect of what my teacher Sifu Ryan calls the needle in the cotton. There is a strength within the softness of it. It's a very, very. I'm talking on macrocosm here, so it's the environment. There's a strength within the softness of the environment, within the yield within the environment, that is propelling this association, this connection. So what I've said as a shaman, you're trying to draw together energy threads that exist within the environment with your own. But there's also this needle in the cotton. There's also this thing within nature that makes that happen anyway, that you don't have any choice about. And there's an awful lot to be learned about this group change. It was a really dull word. We should probably give them, we should be reading Kindred Spirit when we give them these names, mate. Give them some. I keep making fun of Kindred Spirit, shouldn't I? I should stop that. The grouping, the association of energy changes with each other happens naturally, and they have an affinity with each other. And as a shaman, through your yielding, you have a responsibility, sort of almost an obligation on you to not just accept that, but say, yeah, that's part of nature. Great. Let's go with it. They are put together by nature, and we participate in that. In a cyclical fashion very often between different sessions of spirit dance, just like we'll prepare, but it's going to happen. You don't have a choice about it, and that's what's really interesting about group as a change. And we'll do a whole episode on group as a change at a later date, but that's going to be a very interesting one, because I think through that, maybe we'll do that quite early.
Well, we're doing them out of what you might call traditional order.
Yeah.
These
maybe
hexagrams
even
at the end of the day.
Maybe even the next one or the one after that we'll do group, because that's a deep, deep change. There's so much to say about all the changes, basically, but that one in particular, there's a ton of stuff to say about that. And it really gets to the heart of what being a shaman is compared to just being like a normal person. It's that association. You hold yourself together with nature. You join together. You're, in a way, through your shamanic practice, you think you're putting yourself together with nature. But as you go through your shamanic practice, you sooner or later find out that it's not really you doing that. It's nature putting you together with nature. Nature has the lead in that, and you're working together with nature. So look forward to the dedicated episode on group. That would be really, that's going to be a fun one. I'll enjoy that one for sure.
Is it going to be a fun one or a fun two? I'm quite impressed we've managed to get through one of the
fun
changes.
three, mate. It could be a fun
episode.
three.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. And so we will get through this in one episode. But I mean, obviously, we'll have to come back to this stuff because we're about on I can do this in about 5 minutes. The final one, it's not the final one, as I've said. Virtually every change falls out of yield. But the final one that's very, very common falling out of yield is what we call strip. And that is to reduce, to split apart, to strip away, to uncover something. It's just what we're always doing within our spirit dance. We're uncovering nature. We're stripping away parts of the overarching energy pattern that's going on within the dance, peeling it back in order to find the deeper energy, the jikimotsu. I'm going to jump into Japanese there. To find the jikimotsu within the pattern. And this is quite active, but again, it's not you being active here. This is shard in the macrocosm. Yeah, there's not shard in the microcosm. Macrocosm here is still you just yielding to stuff. But within the macrocosm, there's shard there. There's something that causes your energy thread, for instance, to split. For instance, in the Toru and Bitchig, in the circle dance, what decides the shaman to move, to split from the overarching circle of dancers and move into the middle and carry on the thread, extend the thread in his own individual, her own individualistic way within the circle before again they join back together again? What decides that? Well, if the shaman decides that, the shaman's not doing strip. The shaman's not doing very good spirit dance, basically, because it shouldn't be. Nature decides that. Nature cuts the shaman away from the overarching energy thread. It splinters or peels off another one. In a way, it splits it apart. You know, like when you strip the bark off a branch or something like that. And in doing so, uncovers something new. So again, it's this idea of renewal that's strongly associated with the idea of yielding to nature. If you yield to nature in general, you will renew things within nature. But sometimes nature needs to prune you up. You're like pruning a bush or to peel you back or to peel back what's going on, that the energy that you're participating in order to uncover the jikimotsu. I have no English word for jikimotsu. We should have had an Armabella term for that as well. Maybe we did. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, let's stick with jikimotsu for today. And so that's the final one. But like I say, all of the changes, so you just remember this as we go through the rest of these changes. All of the changes we're going to talk about, all the energy changes we're going to talk about are, in a certain sense, common energy changes that fall out of yield. Yeah, every single one of them. So yeah.
Oh dear.
Just remember that I said that.
Okay, we happy there then, Damon?
Yeah, that's good, mate. That's good.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, cool.
It's so we've managed to get through yield in one episode, which is an achievement.
Well, ideally we'll get through one. For most of them, we'll get through. There'll be a few where we don't, but for most of them, I think we'll get through most of them in one episode. Because we're just giving an overview here, there should be enough there for people who've been practicing spirit dance to go away and play around with yield. And you probably noticed we've already been encouraging you to play around with yield multiple times since the podcast began.
Yeah.
This is maybe just formalizing that the change is actually there within nature. And you're probably doing it already if you're listening to these episodes in a meaningful way. What I mean by that is you've done a bunch of practice at level 3 and you're maybe starting out on level 4, done a bit of practice on level 4. I think you already know what we're talking about on this one in terms of yield. Because if you didn't, to a certain extent, you wouldn't have got here. So that's the issue. You know.
Well, there's two sort of fun episodes, lighter episodes to come out of this, which I'd really love to talk about, which is the Black Shaman, talking about the Black Shaman and what all that's about.
Yeah, plural, mate. There's not just one. I don't want to give the idea there's this one guy roaming around Mongolia called the Black Shaman. It sounds like a superhero
I think a lot
right?
of people think of black shamans and they have negative connotations.
So there is that term. There is that term, and I use that as well. That's the problem. So the term Black Shaman has two completely different meanings in shamanism in general, at least two. One is a shaman who uses their shamanism for self-serving ends. that basically use their shamanism to hurt other people, which shamanisms are actually able to do. That kind of black shaman is not interesting. You want to stay away from that kind of black shaman. Just have nothing to do with them, basically. It's the other kind of black shaman we're talking about here, the interesting, smoky one with the mirrors. Those are the guys we're interested in here.
Well, we can definitely talk about those. And the approaching how we are natural shamans as kids when we're born. I think that would be a nice angle into the whole sort of miasma angle as well, which I think would be an interesting episode.
I think in general, that one's quite well known. A lot of people who, a lot of other people, and not just us, have mentioned this. Shamanic interested people who have mentioned this many, many times. But yeah, we can talk about that as well.
Okay, thanks so much for listening, guys. You can support us over at patreon.com/wovenenergy, where if support us over there, you can get some extra bits and pieces. It's been a pleasure as always, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.